Concept is a word we will use throughout the semester, so I wanted to give you a quick primer about how this term is used in philosophy. To make it short and sweet, concepts are mental representations. This is a somewhat simplistic definition, but it will do for now. We will develop it further as the course unfolds. Just for comparison, think of someone asking the question, "What is energy?" and getting the response that it is the ability, capacity, or the potential to do work. Again, a simplistic answer, but it will do as a starting point. Nevertheless, there are two key terms in this definition I have to clarify. These are the terms mental and representation. Starting with the second, representation. Even if we limit our usage to philosophy, this term harbors an ambiguity. In one sense, it is a noun that means something that stands for or is about something else. In a different but related sense, it is used as a noun to denote a relation between two things by virtue of which one represents the other. Let's take them one by one. Something that stands for or is about something else. What does that mean? So here is a thing or an object, and here is another thing or an object. Currently, there is no relationship between them except maybe the spatial relationship of being side by side. But when certain other conditions are satisfied, one of them becomes a representation of the other. It becomes something that is about the other. I will not talk about the conditions that need to be satisfied for this representation relationship to come into being. We might discuss these down the line, but so far, this is what representation in the first sense means. Now to the second sense. The relation between two things by virtue of which one represents the other. Take a look at these other relations that hold between two things. For example, the relation of loving that holds between a person and some other person or entity. Or the spatial relation to the left of, which can relate any two objects located in space. The relation supports, as in a column supporting a lintel, as in the famous Stonehenge. The relation of contradiction between two beliefs that you might hold. The relation of representation is exactly like those, a two-object relation. Of course, not every relation is a two-object relation. For example, the relation of betweenness takes at least three objects. Anyhow, you get the idea. Representation, in the second sense, is a relation like these. Okay, we're going to move on, but before that, I want to emphasize one thing. I want to remind you of one thing. Please do not forget the often neglected fact that representations themselves are objects, that they can be represented by other objects, other representations. So here is a representation of a pot of flowers, and here is a canvas that doesn't represent anything at this point, but can become, under suitable conditions, a representation of the pot of flowers on the right. The significance of this will become clear when we get to the philosophy of mind section of the course. Okay, I just finished explaining the first key term in our definition of concept, representation. Now we're going to move on to the explication of mind, or the related adjective mental. Let's start with this. Most people seem to think that the universe, at least partially, is comprised of material or physical objects. Things like horses, bridges, and potted flowers, but that also our body, including our brain, is part of this material universe. But according to a whole bunch of other people, the story doesn't end there. There is also the mental portion of the universe, and our minds, which happen to be part of that mental portion of the universe. The idea is that the mind is somehow associated with the brain, but in most cases, the relationship between the mental and the material is not really fully spelled out. The people who try to spell out such things are usually called philosophers, and we shall see different ways of trying to characterize the relationship between these two putative kinds of entities when we come to the philosophy of mind section. But in the meantime, here is a general overview. You might want to take a look at it if you're interested, but otherwise, don't worry about it. This is just for those who are curious. So we're at the point where we can say that concepts are mental entities that represent other things, putting aside the nature of the mental for future discussion. So I'm using words in curly brackets to denote concepts for easy reference, but also to emphasize that concepts are not necessarily images in the mind. Also remember that when we talk about the mind, we talk about entities in the mind or states of the mind. For example, we often say things like happiness is a state of the mind. Keep in mind, though, that happiness is not a concept. It might be an affective or emotive mental state, but it itself is not a concept. However, we can have a concept of happiness, and in fact we do. But beyond that, we also have a concept of concept, a representation of concepts. Think about it, this whole video is about our concept of concept. The key takeaway here is that concepts are representations, but they can represent both things outside and inside the mind. All right. This brings us to the most interesting portion of this video, to empty concepts, concepts that do not represent anything. Just now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, how can concepts be representations of objects, but still not represent anything? Well, I'll try to explain. Let us start with some empty fictional concepts from folklore. I assume that you do agree with me that we have the concept of an elephant that carries the universe on its back, and also the concept of boots that enable you to cover a distance of 7 leagues in one step, that these concepts do not really relate to anything in reality. There are also empty concepts in the history of science. For example, consider the concept of phlogiston, which was supposed to explain combustion before the French chemist Lavoisier discovered oxygen. Or consider the concept of ether that was developed by some physicists before Einstein came up with his revolutionary relativity theory. And of course, it doesn't end there. According to some people, maybe many people, a number of concepts of common sense are also empty concepts. There is a saying attributed to the famous ancient Greek philosopher Aristoteles, "Oh my friends, there are no friends." According to some people, this is an oxymoronic way of expressing the emptiness of the concept of friendship. Last but not least, we have some poets and writers who have claimed that the concept of love is an empty concept. But of course, there are others who claim that love is the truest thing you can find, so who knows?
Homegrown tomatoes, what would life be without homegrown tomatoes? There's only 2 things that money can't buy, and that's true love and homegrown tomatoes.
Well, the only thing I might add to that list is home-baked bread, but that's me. So let's go back to our question. How can there be such empty concepts? And the simplest answer to that question comes from noticing that all of the examples we have looked at are complex concepts, like phlogiston, friendship, magic boots, elephant that carries the universe on its back. All of these are pretty complex concepts that the mind has amalgamated from simpler components, simpler concepts. To give a concrete and simple example, think about having the relatively simple concept of cube and also the simple concept of blue, and then combining this in your mind into the more complex concept of a blue cube. In this case, you hit the mark. The world happens to have an object that corresponds to the concept that you have generated. But we know that we're not always this lucky. If we take the concept of gold and the concept of mountain and combine them to generate the concept of a golden mountain, reality doesn't comply. I've been looking high and I've been looking low, and I haven't found a golden mountain yet. And as far as I know, nobody else has.
I've been looking high and I've been looking low, looking for my Shanghai Lil.
And as you very well know, science fiction is full of empty concepts, which makes it all the more fun. Okay, we're almost there, except that I want to tie the discussion of complex concepts to conceptual analysis, an activity that is the essential starting point of all philosophy. Conceptual analysis is breaking down a complex concept into its components, into its constituent parts. Let's focus once again on the complex concept Golden Mountain, since we are already familiar with it. As a first step, we can break down this concept into two components, gold and mountain. And then we can further analyze these concepts, if we need to, since both gold and mountain are themselves complex concepts. Now, the idea is that by doing this, that is, by analyzing the concept and fully understanding what it's made of, we also gain a better understanding of what we're thinking about, what we're looking for, and what we mean. And you can appreciate the importance of this when we come to the more complex concepts we deal with in philosophy, especially since these happen to be the linchpins of the conceptual mental map by means of which we represent to ourselves the universe we live in. That is all I have to say, my friends. But of course, if Aristoteles is right, I have no friends. In any case, if you have questions, please